Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Northern Housing Summit. I'm Tracy Harrison. I'm Chief Executive of the Northern Housing Consortium, and I'm delighted to welcome you here this morning to this, our 17th annual summit. And although we've been doing this for nearly 2 decades, this is the first time that we've done it online. And of course, that's a consequence of the extraordinary times that we find ourselves in. But we know how much you value having the opportunity to come together with your colleagues and peers from councils, housing associations, ALMOs, and the combined authorities right across the north. So we were really determined that today's event would still go ahead despite the times that we're in. So can I start by thanking our event sponsors today: Campbell to Kell, Commonplace, Consortium Procurement Construction, Elliott Associates, Energy Angels, Locata, Media Works, Page Park, Retinue, the GEM programme, and Ward Hadaway. Thank you all for your continuing support. And these extraordinary times and how we recover from them is one of the 2 themes that we're going to be exploring today. So today's event is all about our North rising to the challenges, the challenge of recovery from COVID-19 and the challenge of reaching net zero and decarbonisation of our existing homes. And I know that this is a sector that is absolutely up for both of those challenges. And I hope that over the last 12 months, you've seen the consortium step up and support you and your teams on these challenges. On COVID-19, we worked very rapidly to provide you with practical support, including webinars with the regulator and the Housing Ombudsman. And moving our events and networks online, which we did immediately, has meant that your colleagues have been able to support each other through this extraordinary time. And the record levels of engagement and attendance that we've had at our events and roundtables has really shown just how valuable colleagues have found this. We also moved at pace to develop our recovery offer to government, setting out how investing in new homes and net zero could really help the North through this period and kickstart economic recovery. On net zero, you will have seen a range of activity from us through our North Net Zero programme. And this programme has been generously supported by our programme partners at Holton Housing, Liverpool City Region Housing Associations, 13 Together, and Consortium Procurement. And with our North Net Zero programme, we really have 2 main aims. So firstly, it's about building knowledge and connection amongst consortium members so that you feel confident about decarbonising your existing homes. And then it's about contributing to securing the policy and resources that you need to ready your homes for net zero. So we've already run 9 webinars for members, and they've covered topics from climate emergency to finance and energy efficiency to decarbonising heat. And over 600 delegates from your organisations have attended these from housing right across the North. So do please look out for more events coming in the new year and for more details on Consortium Procurement Construction, which is our new partnership with the LHC. And through that, we will be offering a full suite of solutions that will support construction, refurbishment and maintenance of social housing, including modern methods of construction and other construction-based whole house frameworks. In terms of our work to secure policy and resources, you're going to hear from Sarah Longlands shortly about the exciting new research that we're doing with IPPR North. And this is intended to set out the economic case for decarbonisation and demonstrate how we can help government to deliver on 2 important priorities at once. So that's net zero and levelling up. We're building on our already strong relationships with NHC and forming new relationships with the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. And I'm delighted that we're going to welcome their Director of Energy Efficiency and Local to the North, virtually of course, early next month. And later this month, the consortium will be appearing before the House of Commons Environmental Audit Committee to give evidence on housing and net zero in the North. So our stronger, clearer voice on behalf of members is being heard in the corridors of power. So in terms of rising to these twin challenges, we have a fantastic selection of speakers lined up for you today, which includes a recording from the Housing Minister, Chris Pincher, Lord Deben, Chair of the Committee on Climate Change, Chris Osterland, who's joining us from Sweden to talk about the work of her association. And then closer to home, we have two celebrities in the form of our Northern Metro mayors, Andy Burnham and Steve Rotherham, who are both joining us this afternoon. I think the fact that Chris is able to join us from Sweden today demonstrates our determination to really embrace the possibilities that are offered by holding today's event online. And running the summit online obviously also means that we have a far smaller carbon footprint, which is in line with our net zero ambitions, but it also offers some other benefits. So I hope that you will already have had the opportunity to indulge in some Zoom networking. If you haven't, then you will have a chance to do that this afternoon between 1 and 1:30. And our event sponsors today are hosting the breakout chat. So do please call into them, say hello, and find out more about what they have to offer. And we will be making full use of the chat and the Q&A functions on this platform, which I know you're all very familiar with now. And you can join the conversation on social media using the hashtag on the screen there, NHC Summit 20. And be aware that usually at the summit, we hold a range of workshops and breakout sessions. This year, we've done them all ahead of time. So those 9 webinars on net zero that I mentioned earlier are all available for you to watch on demand, free of charge, on the NHC website. So we've got over 10 hours of content and about 28 expert speakers. So it's better than Netflix and it's free. So today's event is in 2 halves. We're together now until about 10 to 12, and then we'll reconvene at 1:30 for the afternoon sessions. Our chair for today is Winifred Robinson from the BBC, and I really want to thank Winifred for waiving her fee for this event today. And that has meant that we have been able to donate the fee that we had budgeted to the consortium's charitable trust, who will use the funds for our Unlocking Success tenant bursary scheme. And over 30 tenants right across the north have already benefited from that scheme in the first round, and Winifred's generosity will certainly enable more to do so. So that's about it from me. I do have one remaining task to perform this morning, and that is to pay tribute to the consortium's chair, Tom Miskell. Tom stands down from the NHC board at our AGM later this month after 5 years as our chair. And I know that you will all know Tom from his career in the sector, including the creation of Together Housing Group. And he has been a steady hand leading the consortium's board and a great source of support to me personally as the organisation's chief executive and to my predecessor, Joe Bowden, as well. So I know that this is not the last that we will see of Tom, but I did want to take this opportunity just to thank him on behalf of everyone at the consortium and on behalf of all of our members, and we'll miss you, Tom. So with that, I will hand over to Tom, who's going to say a few words before Winifred steers us through the rest of the day. So over to you, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I wasn't quite expecting that, so thank you. What a privilege it's been to be chair of the Northern Consortium, and something I'll obviously sort of stay involved with. And I'd just like to sort of thank everybody for the support during the time I've been involved, and also to wish all the success for the future to both the consortium staff and to the board and Paul Fidderman, my successor. Just a couple of words from me, and usually I'm brought on to sort of make up time because other people sort of overrun, and I'm the one who says things pretty quickly. I just want to say I think it's a really, really important time for the consortium. I don't think there's ever been a more important time. I think when we look at the voice for the North, I think you can see around us at the moment all the issues in terms of how things are being treated on furlough, in terms of the debates with the Metro mayors, in terms of the whole sort of government policy, in terms of sort of the kickback from the newly elected Northern Conservative MPs who've set up their own group. So I think it's really, really important that we all pull together to try and make that case for the North. And I think in doing that, I just want to emphasise how dependent we are on people to participate, and also to sort of contribute. So I think when we sort of say thank you to sponsors for enabling this event, that enables us to get that voice out by those sponsors. People who partner with us to do some of the research, that enables us to do some of the research. People like Winifred, who very kindly waived a fee, that enables us to beef up what we're doing on the charitable stuff. And also all of you who are members of the consortium and also who participate in consortium procurement, because I think if you do get the opportunity and you're not currently doing it, or you can do more of it, to join with the consortium procurement, then please do so, because anything that we, apart from helping yourselves, anything that we do on that also helps us to make a better and a bigger voice for housing in the North. So thank you very much for everybody for the support. Wish everybody well and have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Winifred Robinson. I work for BBC Radio 4 on a consumer programme called You and Yours, and I'm just here today in that capacity as a journalist on that programme. So I'm hoping to come away with lots of stories and ideas from you. I care passionately about housing because my earliest memories are we were born in a 2 up, 2 down slum, privately rented slum by the docks in Liverpool. And we're a big family. And my earliest memories are my mum being desperate to get out of there. And eventually when I was 5, we were rehoused in a really lovely council house in Liverpool where I lived until I was 25. And I live in Warrington now. So I know how important decent housing is to people's lives. And that's why I wanted to be with you today. So my role is just going to be to introduce the speakers, but also to help you to take part and put your questions, which we very much want you to do. So if you look to the bottom of the screen, you will see that Q&A function. That's where we want you to post your questions or comments, anything you want to say or add. If you would just type as we go along, you don't have to wait until the end. And if we're going to take your question, what we'll do is we will say your name. I will say your name. We'll come over to you. The team will switch your microphone on, so you don't have to worry about that at all. Just a reminder, this session will end around 11:50. If you have a technical problem, you know, if you lose contact or whatever, then please do get in touch with the NHC on the number that you were given with your joining instructions, and you'll also find that same number in your message box. Now, this morning we're going to talk, as Tracy said, mainly about economic recovery in the North, and this afternoon about the role that housing can play in that. I'm sorry, that's this morning. Economic recovery in the North, the role housing will play in economic recovery in the North. This afternoon, climate change, how housing can be part of the solution. So this first session, we'll hear the economic case for improving the energy efficiency of older housing stock in the North and how exactly that might be done. Sarah Longlands, the director of the Institute for Public Policy Research North, is going to explain that to us. You'll know that the IPPR North, I'm sure it's a dedicated think tank for the North of England. And Sarah specialises in regional and local economic development. Now, when Sarah is finished, we've got a panel of experts, all members of the Northern Housing Consortium. They'll give us their thoughts on what Sarah's said and how they are hoping to improve the energy efficiency of the homes that they manage and control. And then we'll come to you for questions. So as I said, please post those questions as they occur to you. If we're coming over to you, don't worry, we'll sort out the technicals for that. So Sarah, if I could hand over to you.
Thank you, Winifred, and good morning, everyone. It's let me just share my video. It's really good to be here and delighted to be able to share with you some of the emerging findings from the research that we've been doing with the Northern Housing Consortium on how housing can be an economic stimulus in a time of COVID-19 and as part of helping us to recover in the longer term. Next slide, please. For those of you who don't know IPPR North, as Winifred said, we're a dedicated think tank for the North of England, and our vision is very much a North which has realised its potential by taking power into its own hands. It's a future where regional inequalities no longer exist and opportunity and prosperity is open to all. We've done various pieces of work looking at decarbonisation and the role of nature in particular in the North over the last number of years. We're doing this work with Northern Housing Consortium on housing, and we're also looking at the decarbonisation of some of the North's industries, including steel. So this is an area of work that's very close to our heart. We've also got a particular interest in housing. So recently we've published work on supported housing and on homelessness in the North East. So this work, I guess, really very much follows on the back of our interests in tackling the regional inequalities affecting the North, and also at the minute trying to examine how we can come out of this challenge of COVID-19 in a way which makes us stronger and gives the North a chance to really push above, to really punch above its weight. Next slide, please. And this project, looking at how the decarbonisation of housing could act as an economic stimulus in a time of COVID-19, really came out of a discussion that we had with Tracy at the Northern Housing Consortium when we were exploring, what did COVID-19 mean for the North and for housing, and it really very much reflected our joint interest in the subject theme. Just turned on my video. Sorry, it wouldn't let me turn it on earlier. And so here I am. Nice to see you all. So yeah, as I said, the project that I'm going to talk about this morning really came from our joint discussion with the Northern Housing Consortium and very much reflected our joint interest in how we start to recover from COVID-19. And there are two kind of main aims of the project. First of all, to draw on existing research by IPPR nationally, a report called All Hands to the Pump, which was published in the summer. And it looked very much at the national economic stimulus, and we wanted to drill down a bit further to examine what the regional economic case for a housing decarbonisation stimulus would be in a time of COVID, and what the opportunities in terms of jobs, training and economic uplift could be as a result. So that was the first part. And the second part was to examine a roadmap for change, and particularly the skills agenda, how the North could take forward the opportunity, and how we could use devolution and support from government to really realise the opportunity. And that was really where we started from. This morning, what I want to do is give you a sense of the emerging findings, and we are hoping to publish the report in full in a couple of weeks' time. So that will give you a lot more of the detail of it. Why did we want to focus particularly on the social rented sector? Well, as you will all be aware, there is great examples of work going on already in housing decarbonisation across the North and indeed across the UK. And because of the good practice that's already present within the social rented sector, because of this graph here shows, because of the fact that the social sector already has a much higher level of energy efficiency compared with other, with home ownership and with the private rented sector, we felt that if you focused attention, you focus investment on the social rented sector, then that actually will help to create and build momentum for change much more generally. And it's also the case, I think, as many of you will be aware, that social housing providers can deliver at scale and have got the expertise in-house to really help to make this happen and to really shape an exciting and ambitious programme of decarbonisation across regions like the North. Next slide, please. So what did we do? So first of all, what we did was to build, as I said, on our national research to examine what the regional opportunities might be. So the national research that my colleagues in London did, which is All Hands to the Pump, which is the picture on the right of your screen. This looked at the sort of national picture for housing decarbonisation. We wanted to drill further into what did the regional picture look like. What would housing decarbonisation mean for the North in terms of jobs, training and GVA uplift, and that's what we've done as part of the research. I won't be able to tell you about that today, but because we're still finalising the results, but that's hopefully what we'll be able to launch it in a couple of weeks. And then the second part was about examining the challenge of the skills supply and demand, especially in the context of the pandemic. So we did this. So that was the two things we wanted to look at particularly as part of that economic case. And we did that through desk-based research and review of existing literature and policy. And we also had lots of conversations with many of you today that are on this call to explore your views on the potential and some of the challenges as well, and what perhaps some of the key asks of government would be. And then the third stage was about actually publishing that, which, as I said, we're going to be doing it in a couple of weeks' time. Next slide, please. So I guess, you know, why does home improvement matter so much at the current time? And I think one of the most important things at the minute is that we are all spending much more time at home, and our homes have perhaps never been so important to us. But that has also meant that it has highlighted just how poor some of the North's housing stock is, particularly in the private rented sector. So as I say on here, the UK's housing stock is the most inefficient in Europe. It's also among the oldest. And in the North, 24% of all homes were built before 1919, 44% before 1944. And COVID-19 is really highlighting just how poor housing stock is in some area. And that's been backed up by research by the University of Huddersfield that the Northern Housing Consortium have also been supporting in recent months. The second thing is that climate change is really urgent. Net zero by 2050 is a really ambitious goal, but as I'm sure Lord Debnam will say later, progress has been far too slow to date. And we seem to really lack the momentum and the long-term vision for how we're going to achieve that goal. We know that progress has been made in the North, so 64 councils have declared a climate emergency, but COVID-19 and the challenges of Brexit and so on and so forth have really kind of halted progress, I guess, in recent years. And of course, home heating for us is a really important part of how we might start to make progress on tackling the challenge of net zero by 2050. Because the majority of homes in the North and indeed the rest of the UK are heated through gas boilers. And they are actually the principal source of household emissions in the UK. So that's a really big challenge, but it's also an opportunity, and that's what we want to explore in a little bit more depth this morning. And then finally, I mean, just on that last point, that's why home improvement, why decarbonisation as a stimulus is so important, because we know from the figures that we're starting to see on working age claimants that new employment is beginning to cause real pain, and that COVID-19 is creating real shockwaves in terms of unemployment. In some areas, levels of claimant counts that haven't been seen since the early 1990s. So there's a really urgent need to create new opportunities as part of a future recovery. And we believe that this programme of work could have the potential to do just that. Next slide, please. So what's happening nationally? So the government are putting in place their own national stimulus, which was announced as part of Rishi Sunak's fiscal stimulus back in the summer, which seems like an awful long time ago in the world that we're living in. But that included a number of kind of key pots of money, if you like. So we had the Green Homes Grant, the Public Sector Decarbonisation Scheme, and the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund Demonstrator. And they are all supported by the regional energy hubs. And of course, there are 5 of those across England, including 2 hubs in the north, which cover North East Yorkshire and Humber and the Northwest. So we have at a national scale the framework for a national economic stimulus. But what we thought was really missing in this was the economic stimulus at a more regional basis, which reflected the particular challenges and opportunities that we have in this part of the world. And of course, there are also kind of some key challenges with the national stimulus. It's very time limited and short term. So for example, the Green Homes Grant, the government have stipulated this needs to be spent by March next year. And that's a very short time frame, given the amount of disruption that households are undergoing at the current time. Second of all, you're trying to implement what are big, ambitious and new areas of technology in the middle of a national emergency, and that's not exactly ideal. It's also a one-size-fits-all approach, which is typical, but that also means that it isn't necessarily joined up across government departments. So for example, the scheme has been launched by BEIS, but it does have links across to skills. So for example, what are the connections with the Department of Education or with work going on in MHCLG to tackle some of the longer term issues with housing stock, particularly in parts of the north. So there are some issues about the joining up across departments. But the good news is that the national stimulus is there, and whatever we were able to propose in this project would be a really good complement to that existing framework. Next slide, please. So our proposal is an ambitious home improvement plan for the north, a real economic stimulus at a time when hopefully we really could use it most. And this combines 3 key issues. First of all, job creation and business growth. Second, new skills and training opportunities. And thirdly, the chance to end fuel poverty by improving household finances. And I think those triumvirate of issues are really the prize that is there to be realised if we can get the programme right, and if we can make this really happen, bringing together all of the different players and the right investment from central government. And basically what we're suggesting is a long-term housing decarbonisation stimulus led by social housing providers and combined and local authorities. And of course, those organisations already work, as you will all know, in very close partnership at the current time. The second thing is that the package prioritises the use of domestic heat pumps because we believe that's probably the most appropriate technological pathway, because there are fewer barriers than other pathways at the current time. And heat pumps, of course, are not new technology. They've been used in Canada to heat homes for many years. And they basically involve transferring heat from one source to another and using that to heat a home in a kind of constant manner. So not new, and something that could actually be rolled out fairly rapidly, given the right skills level and the right demand. Alongside heat pumps, because heat pumps will only work if you've got the right retrofit measures as well. So the need to improve energy efficiency through insulation, and also support for the development of heat networks where that's appropriate. And then fourthly, the importance that we've highlighted, the importance of awareness raising and education. And that was something that really came through strongly in the conversations we had with many of you during the course of research. So awareness raising with consumers, but also with firms and businesses who have the potential to diversify into the sector should they wish. And that would really help to build demand and achieve a market transformation. Next slide, please. But of course, the potential of this in terms of jobs and training and the economic uplift in terms of GVA that could be created will only really be actualized if we can make sure our skills system is fit for purpose. And a lot of the time when it comes to skills, our focus is on the supply, but actually probably the biggest issue in terms of this programme is the demand. Because supply is still at a very, is still developing, but demand is still very emergent. So people don't necessarily think about careers in low carbon housing. They don't necessarily take on extra training if you're a plumber or a heating engineer to get the skills and qualifications that you need to be able to move into this sector. But having said that, the opportunities really exist now. We know there's a national framework, a national stimulus for it. And those opportunities are for existing trades to diversify. So for example, plumbers, heating engineers, plasterers and builders and so on. They're also for new trainees coming into these professions through colleges and other providers. And you know, sometimes people may not be aware that when you enter a training course to take up one of those professions, that you can also look to develop your career in a low carbon housing market. And thirdly, there are also people who are working at the moment in technical or related occupations, you know, for example, refrigeration, air conditioning, who actually have got the right skills and could transition quite easily, particularly if they've been made redundant in the current crises, to take up positions in these new sectors. So our proposals are about really trying to transform demand, but also trying to see if the skills system can meet the challenge. And that's what I want to come on to talk about now. So how do we realise the opportunity? The first thing that we've suggested is that we need to raise and improve awareness among existing firms. So we know, for example, that there are 100,000 registered gas fitters in the UK, but only 600 accredited heat pump engineers. So imagine what that means in terms of the north of England and what the potential supply of fitters for heat pumps are here. So that's a massive challenge, and one that is also a massive opportunity if we could get it right. And how we can do that is to incentivise the accreditation process. So if you want to move into low carbon housing, there are a number of things that you need to get. You need to get sort of Trustmark accreditation, microgeneration certification, and the PAS 2035, and that will be familiar, I'm sure, to many of you. And these are easily achievable. but people don't always know about it, and people aren't quite sure often of the process. And so we're suggesting that you could incentivize those, including through the use of subsidies where appropriate. We also need to build a demand for skills, as I've already suggested, through consumer awareness. Because when most of us, and even myself before I started this project, when our gas boiler breaks down or oil-fired heating breaks down, we just assume that we phone up a gas engineer and he comes and fits us a new gas boiler. But there are other options out there, like heat pumps. There are grants available to support the installation of those pumps, but consumer awareness is very low, and we still are very, we still sort of just go for gas as a default, really, particularly in urban areas. So, raising awareness about what other heating choices are available and using that to boost demand and hopefully in time realise efficiencies for households. And I guess social housing providers have a really important role to play in that because you're working with your tenants on a regular basis. And then also trying to work with the skills providers. So we know, for example, that colleges and other training providers have often got quite sort of set enrolment timetables for things like plumbing and heating engineers and so on, sort of trades like that. And it would be good to explore with them how we could increase the number of enrolment opportunities so as to boost supply. And that's a conversation, I guess, that needs to happen at a national government point of view as well. So if BEIS are putting forward national stimulus schemes like this and are supporting our work on economic stimulus in the north, then how can we make sure that the DFE are encouraging colleges to get on board with this and to support it in the work that they do on enrolment? Next slide, please. There's also things I think that we can do in the north itself in a much more kind of practical way. So in the research that we did, we found lots of examples of social housing providers taking the lead along with their partners in combined and local authorities, using their own supply chain, their own procurement process to build demand within the supply chain. And that included working with colleges, but also with local enterprise partnerships. And I think that's one of the most powerful ways in which we can start to build awareness and build demand in the wider economy for a lower carbon housing project. There's also an opportunity to do this on a regional approach. And again, this was something that came out quite a lot in the conversations we had. People felt that the North had an opportunity to achieve change at scale. And that would be very much a place-based approach to thinking about heating and energy schemes, and then also the skills that are required to make it happen. And if we could really achieve this change at scale in the North, then that would not only help to drive demand, but it could also help to make the North a centre of excellence when it came to low carbon housing in the longer term. There's a real chance, I think, to connect with some of the new initiatives on institutes of technology, most of which have been elsewhere in the country to date. But you could easily imagine how a new institute of technology could be set up to really drive forward skills and demand in excellence on low carbon housing. And then finally, thinking about skills transition for people who become newly unemployed. This is a real challenge at the minute. We know that levels of claimant count are rising really steadily, particularly in our city regions. And so, getting on board quickly to link social security support with the skills and advice and training that people need so that they have the option to move if they wish into low carbon housing and to have the chance to transition, I think is really important. And that could also include with social housing tenants, because many of those people will also be at the sharp end of this crisis, and being able to reach out to them in an active way to help them move into new opportunities, new training, new employment opportunities, I think could also be a really positive step forward. Next slide. So just to draw it to a close, really, there's I've just set out here kind of what we think the roadmap for change looks like. First of all, this is about investing in the recovery. We are, as part of this package, we are obviously going to be asking government to support us in this mission to decarbonise housing in the north of England. But this shouldn't be seen as a cost. We think of this as an investment in our recovery. It's a stimulus package to help support the market transformation to deliver at scale. and in doing so, that can help to mitigate some of the real challenges of COVID-19 in terms of the economic impact. It can help get people back into employment. It can help to build new skills and support business growth. And crucially, it can also help to put money back into people's pockets at a time when people are really struggling in many parts of the north. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, it's about committing for the longer term. We've suggested that the package of economic stimulus for low carbon housing should be over a 10-year period, because we think that's what it needs to, that's what it's going to take. We can't, just supporting this for sort of short-term initiatives isn't really good enough. We need sustained political and economic investment to really achieve net zero by 2050, and that work needs to start really urgently if we're to meet that really stretching target. And I think that can happen nationally, but we can also lead from the north on a regional basis. Thirdly, I think one of the really striking things about the conversations we had with stakeholders and many of you here today was that lots of people are already working collaboratively on this. And I think that's what we need to build on for the future, to kind of really develop the demand and really build the momentum for change, to show people that we can do something, that climate change is not such a overwhelming crisis that we are kind of paralysed in the face of it, but we can actually do something to change things, whilst at the same time helping people who've been unemployed and improving household finances. I think the other kind of big message that came out of our discussions was the need to, alongside any programme of decarbonisation in the north, to develop a regional audit of housing stock. Some of the discussions that we had suggested that we really have no idea what the energy efficiency ratings are for 60% of the north's housing stock. We know that housing associations and many social housing providers do their own audits of energy efficiency, but there's a lack of kind of joined up data for across the north, so there's a lack of information about how we can really target investment most effectively. So that's another thing that we think would be useful to examine further. Another important message that came out of our discussions was about a neighbourhood approach to maximising the outcomes and also leading by example. So if social housing providers are developing and improving their own stock within areas, can that be an example to help build momentum for change in the private rented sector? A difficult ask, obviously, but I think it's definitely worth exploring. And people also told us that neighbourhoods, the challenge of improvements to homes will only be realised if they're done in the kind of wider context of the issues that a place faces. So that was also kind of another key message, a neighbourhood approach to this challenge. And then finally, and perhaps one of the most important aspects of this, about widening participation and raising awareness. The challenge of decarbonisation can be mystifying at times, and it can seem very remote from our day-to-day lives. And I think trying to widen participation, encouraging conversations, whether that's through, for example, citizens' juries, such as IPPR have been doing in the Northeast, really opening up the debate to enable people to understand more about climate change and the contribution that our homes make to that challenge, and how actually we can work together to try and tackle that. I think would be a really positive step forward. I think as well, engaging directly with firms who, plumbers, heating engineers who already work in this field, who may be aware of it but may not be quite sure how to sort of diversify into the sector. I think that's also a really important part of this conversation as well, and seeing them as partners in this process. And I know that many of you are already doing that work in your own projects on decarbonisation. So that's hopefully gives you a bit of an overview of some of the emerging findings from our research. We are really keen to continue the conversation, so our details are there. Please do get in touch with us, and it will be great when we publish the report in a couple of weeks to get your thoughts and feedback at that time as well. But I just want to finish by thanking the Northern Housing Consortium for their support in this project and the support of your members. And I hope that we can really start to create real change and a step change, I guess, in how we deal with and think about climate change in the North, starting with our homes. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you. That's so interesting and obviously really full of information, and it's a topic that lots of people don't know very much about, me included. So I know you'll have lots of questions. If you do have questions, will you please contribute them through that Q&A function at the bottom of your screen as we go along. We're going to go now to a panel for their thoughts on what Sarah has said. Now, I'm just going to introduce them one by one. Each of them just going to speak for a couple of minutes, and then we've got time for you to put your questions. I'll begin then with Ian Wardle. He's the Chief Executive of 13. 13, you'll probably know, it's a social landlord and housing developer. It manages more than 30,000 homes in a kind of swathe right down the northeast of England, from, is it North Tyneside to York, I think? Anyway, Ian, give us your thoughts.
Thanks, Winifred, and thanks very much, Sarah, for sharing those findings, which are absolutely fascinating. So for me, the report is a really important baseline position about what we've known for many, many years, and it accumulates. We never really tackle the fundamentals of the issue about our older housing stock. And it can come across as being really negative, but I think it's really positive. Because there are lots of examples where you can repurpose older housing stock really well, and it will generate a positive net benefit in terms of cash, but also to those outcomes for the tenants or the householder within it. But it's about scalability that Sarah's touched on. It's about scalability and trying some things out. And I think, you know, it's well timed. This is what the Northern Housing Consortium is doing with others, is that we are now facing a really difficult time, and putting money into contractors and into the local economy needs to happen quickly. And to do that, you can do that through older housing stock and investment quicker than through new build. New build takes longer. You know, it's 2 or 3 year lead-in time. We haven't got 2 or 3 years in some of our communities, and we can mobilise quite quickly as well. So a little bit about what 13's been doing is we've got 39,000 homes. We've just agreed our energy targets to get to net zero. So gas in terms of 13, we want to be net zero by 2030, fuel by 2035, and electricity by 2025. And we've just had a big survey done of our 34,000 homes, 39,000 properties, of how we'll get to carbon zero. And the price tag is huge. But if we do it in bits and we pilot things and we share things with others, the price will come down. So we've been doing some retrofit pilots. We've adopted PAS 2035, which Sarah has mentioned as our standard for retrofitting. So we've been looking at insulation, airtightness, integration of new technologies, intelligent learning in our pilots. And what we're finding is that the skills are transferable, but as has been touched on, there needs to be a 5 to 10 year program of continued investment in this in order that the supply chain can respond, because it's itty-bitty, it's not at scale, but they do respond, and the skills are really transferable. It doesn't need dedicated training in certain things. We've been really surprised about how the market's reacted to some of our pilots and how we've tried new things out very positively. So we've had 2 pilots at net zero, and we're about to do a pilot to be net negative, which is our next one, which is one in Hemlington and Middlesbrough, which we're quite excited about. And then we'll start and increase the scale through our stock, and we want to share that learning, and we want to learn from others in order that we make some choices. We joke about it. I think it's about VHS and Betamax. You're worried about which way you're going to go and what you adopt, and some things do work well, but we do have some history in our organisation where we've had to go back and replace things, and it's expensive and it's really disruptive for tenants, and actually it's not fair. So as Sarah's mentioned, that co-creation and that involvement of tenants and that culture change is really important as well. So yeah, it can seem a big thing. I think now is a really important time, but I'm also very positive because I think it'll be a better future.
Ian, thank you. Patrick Berry is the Managing Director of Together Energy. It's a newish energy company. It's growing very quickly. It's based in Clydebank in Scotland, and it managed to get 60,000 new customers in the space of only 18 months. A really interesting thing about it as a company is that 90% of the staff who work for Together Energy were recruited from the poorest 10% of postcodes in Scotland. So Patrick, give us your thoughts.
First thought is that's a different Together Energy.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I just Googled you. I'm so sorry. Tell us who you are then.
Yes, Together Energy is a part of the Together Housing Group.
I'm so sorry. Forgive me.
So different story.
We'll get them on next time, the others.
So I am responsible for all Together Housing's investment in renewable energy and our carbon reduction strategy. So we got 37,000 properties spread across the north of England. We're just again pulling together our carbon reduction strategy, which is sort of focused over a 15-year period, where we over that period intend to transition away from gas and complete our retrofits to get our stock at least across the piece up to a level C, but also looking to combine renewable heat with some form of renewable power, and particularly using solar PV and battery systems in combination with air source heat pumps and retrofit to give us our maximum amount of decarbonisation, but also making it cheap or more affordable for property tenants to live in our properties, whilst also operating within the kind of available budgets that we have for retrofit relative to our properties. What I wanted to raise just about what was said in the presentation, because I think it's very difficult to disagree with any of what's been said, but a couple of key points come up for me. One is around the transition to gas, or away from gas, sorry, to renewable heat. That's a big challenge, because essentially that's about decarbonisation, and there aren't really cost savings for tenants in particular as we make that shift. So it's kind of a difficult sell in some aspects. So it kind of requires, I think, some sort of fiscal measure that supports that. At the moment, all the costs of decarbonisation essentially go to electricity, which is one of the reasons why electricity is 4 times the price of gas. And some of those costs need to transfer across to gas, so we've got more of a level playing field, because that's going to change people's acceptance of that, as well as demand from the privately owned sector as well. So that's pretty key for me. Otherwise, we've got this continued hard sell as we go along. Second point was about capturing social value in the jobs. I think we've got 2 choices. They're not mutually exclusive. One is that we can have a trickle-down effect. So if we increase demand in the sector, that will rise elsewhere, and the training and education institutions will respond, and private businesses will respond, and they will create the jobs. The other one is that we will seek to capture that social value more directly ourselves by the way in which we contract, and certainly allow our own tenants as well as people in local communities to be part of that training and employment structure. The third point was not to miss out on the kind of radical changes that can arise from decarbonisation for us as social housing providers, so that carbon becomes part of everything we do. It's not a kind of thing that occurs on its own, but there are opportunities there to derive revenue from how we work with changes that are taking place with the grid. So these new energy assets can be just that, assets which drive new forms of revenue, and particularly then our shift to the data that these assets drive, and how that can change our maintenance regimes from reactive to proactive over time. A lot of savings in that, a lot of radical changes to how we might deal with our tenants. So I think there's great opportunities in this, and one of the key things is to get started. I think there's often a desire to try and get everything in place before we make that start. I think just a need to get started and start to drive things along, and other things will emerge. So I'd like to leave it there, Winifred.
Okay, lovely, thank you. We just have a question for you, just on what you've said. Dave Proctor, he wants you to repeat something that you said. Yeah, you talked about 13's energy targets. Could you just repeat that, what that was? This is a delegate called Gareth Parkin. What are your energy targets, Patrick, just before we leave it?
The energy targets, we want all our properties to be a EPC level C by 2030. That applies to most social housing. We want to have transitioned away from gas by 2035. And we are aiming to install 15 megawatts of solar PV and battery systems also by 2035. And we're aiming to reduce our operational carbon impact by 50% by 2030. So that includes
Okay.
Fleets and so on, shifting to electric, etc.
Okay, I hope that's cleared things up for Gareth. Patrick, thank you. Next is Pat Ritchie. She's the Chief Executive of Newcastle City Council. Pat.
Hi. Can you, sorry, I'll just get my video
We
on.
can hear you.
Okay.
We can hear you.
Hopefully
Yeah,
you can see me now too.
Yeah.
Thanks very much to Sarah for the presentation, and for Ian and Patrick talking about some of the practical things that we're already doing, I think, both in this city and in other parts of the north. I wanted to just talk a bit about the approach we're taking in Newcastle, and how that relates to our net zero 2030 commitment, and then the way in which we think that sort of could potentially stimulate the economy within the city, and then a bit about some of the practical things we're doing with our own housing stock. So first thing I would say is, and Sarah said this, I think one of the most important things around tackling climate change is that needs to be done in a collaborative way. And we were one of the first cities to actually declare a climate change emergency. And not only did the City Council declare an emergency, so did our 2 universities and our hospital trust. And we've worked with key players in the city and with the voluntary sector, communities and other partners to launch our Net Zero Newcastle 2030 action plan. And I can't really stress enough that this has to be done with business, with regional players, with local players, but it's got to be a kind of collaborative joint process, and that's why our strategy is really important. And that work was led by the leader of the council, but jointly chaired with Professor Hayley Fowler, who I think is on the call, and who is I think possibly speaking later on in the sessions today. We were very clear that in developing that plan that 64% of the citywide emissions within Newcastle come from energy usage, either domestic or non-domestic properties. And so the strategy looks at things like transport, it looks at things like behaviour change, but it has a strong strand around energy usage, and particularly how that relates to our housing stock. And so in the strategy, we've looked at things like how we improve the nature of new build. And I have to say that has to be done partly through new national standards, which wasn't really talked about in Sarah's presentation because it was focused on existing stock. But there is something really quite important about how we set standards for a future build. And we'll look to do that in the city, but it needs to be done nationally as well. We're also looking at how we apply low carbon products and technology to create smart homes and reduce energy consumption. And we've been looking at things like heat pumps. In fact, we have a pilot in our housing stock to install heat pumps within your homes in Newcastle. We've also been looking at things like district heating networks and other measures. So we have a very kind of comprehensive approach. And we're working with the university and kind of partners to really look at how we do that in an innovative way and improve the business innovation to kind of tackle some of these issues within the city. And I think kind of key to that is then how you link that to the future recovery of a city like Newcastle. As we go through this pandemic, we've been, like other cities in the north, very heavily affected in our economy by the impact of COVID-19. To give you some idea, since March, our claimant count has gone from 6,000 to 15,000. And that's before people come off furlough. We've got about 33% of our workforce on furlough, and we've got a month's reprieve on that. But if you think about the potential economic impact, we think that as part of our submission to the Comprehensive Spending Review, we put forward a large-scale programme of housing retrofit, because we think there are jobs there that young people particularly could train to do, and quite a significant part of our strategy is around that. And I think what Patrick said was quite interesting. It's whether you kind of leave that to the private sector, or do you do something around social enterprise, maybe in partnership with housing providers, to really provide a workforce to do that work. A long time ago, I was Deputy Chief Exec of the WISE Group in Glasgow, and that's exactly what we did. We retrofitted, we employed people who were unemployed, trained them on retrofitting, and did that in partnership with housing providers across the west of Scotland. And it seems to me that sort of model is something to think about. The other thing we've looked to do is really work with SMEs to help them benefit from the current stimulus that the Chancellor announced earlier this year. So we've got a number of events with SMEs to engage them in understanding how they can take advantage of those changes and of the support to help people retrofit their homes. And we've also done a lot of work with suppliers and other businesses. And I think one of the things is that we need to think about long term is, does the private sector really begin to take this up? Any public sector investment needs to be seen as a stimulus to change in the way that private investment comes into this whole area of work. And it links to something that Sarah said about demand and behaviour change. And it seems to me one of the big things that we need to think about is how we get consumers to demand differently. And there is a big kind of communications, behaviour change, social media campaign kind of work that we need to do really within the city and across regions and across the north to really kind of develop that big campaign. So they're just some thoughts more from a kind of city level. We're doing a lot of this with the Combined Authority, who also have declared a climate change emergency. But I do think we could do more as the North, maybe cities and combined authorities coming together with housing providers to really, really make the case for this to government. Because it's quite disappointing we've only had a 1-year spending review, and a lot of this big capital investment and the sort of stimulus that we need really will have to wait until, you know, next year. And I think if we can get our act together to really promote that through the Northern Housing Consortium, working with partners, there's something collectively that we can do to make the case. And maybe in the chat I can talk a bit about what we're doing with YHN and our own housing stock and other providers in the city, but I probably said enough now, and I wanted to kind of talk about the bigger picture.
Thank you. It's Sandy Livingston's going to talk to us next. He's the Executive Director of Property for Onward. It's a new name, but Onward brings together 5 housing associations and manages 35,000 properties in the northwest of England. So Sandy, hand over to you.
Thank you. Oops, I'm on or off. I'm on now. Thank you very much for that. We'll just see how good my Wi-Fi is. But what I would do is, for me, I think we welcome the report. I think that a great deal in it that we recognise and support. I mean, we work with a lot of very vulnerable communities and very proud ones across the northwest. So there's a lot of themes in this that are very much close to our heart. So for us, like many housing associations, our focus is putting money in our customers' pockets, either by providing them with employment opportunities if we can, by reducing their bills, or more importantly, improving the quality of their homes, which is one of the key things that we do and we are already doing. And I think one of the things is the opportunity to do more. I listen to my other colleagues from housing associations and Pat from Newcastle City Council. I think there's a fair degree of consensus across the north on what can be done and the opportunity that is there. We already plan to spend over £300 million in the next 10 years on our existing homes, even setting aside the requirements to achieve zero carbon. For us, it's about the Northern Pound, it's about investing in the north. So the majority of people who carry out that work for us are northwest-based housing contractors and suppliers. And I think we see our role as being one of facilitating their growth and encouraging them down the path, rather than relying on the private sector to do it by itself. I think we very much have a role to do in delivering that. So the part of the report talks about a skills framework we see as being central to this. It is about encouraging that transfer of skill, and it is about us encouraging our suppliers and contractors to embrace the opportunity collectively. For me, net zero carbon by 2050 is something that we simply have to do. There is no plan B, it has to be done. But I think it's recognising it not as a threat, but as an opportunity. So I would endorse what my fellow speakers have said. I think we should embrace it. It is a chance for economic recovery and stimulus, but it does require long-term support and funding and commitment from government and us to make it happen. In terms of onwards approach across our 35,000 homes, our current target is to achieve EPC by 2030. We will seek to achieve net zero carbon before 2050. But one of the more critical things for us is making sure that we invest in a way that there's no regret. So it's useful for our customers. What we install needs to work, and our customers need to be able to use it. Hopefully it will reduce their heating bills, but certainly what it will do as a minimum is mitigate potential increases in consumer pricing for utilities. We would like to see that happen. We've identified a sum of £110 million that we are setting aside to invest in our homes over the next 10 years. So we're already looking at, with others, how we will actually invest that money. We're working within other housing associations, Liberal City region, to look at how we work with the Manufacturing Technology Centre to look at cutting-edge solutions to retrofit. We will pilot a number of different opportunities across our housing stock next year in collaboration with others. We'll then collectively look at our learning experience and then identify a programme of investment that will improve all of our housing stock. We also are doing a similar thing in Manchester with the GMCA, with the other housing associations. So I think my summary is that I agree, there's a lot of collaboration and a lot of opportunity. I always take my glass is always half full. I think that this is the chance for a northern recovery, and I think just the subtext of the report, or the clear focus of the report, of encouraging government to match our ambition by putting forward the social housing decarbonisation fund and making sure that it commits to genuinely taking the opportunity to level up in the north and improve the quality of our customers' homes. So that would be my thoughts on the report, and I thank you for listening.
Thanks, Andy. And it's we definitely need to keep our optimism going, don't we, at the moment? Paul Shevlin is the Chief Executive of Craven District Council. Paul, can I invite you to speak to us now?
Yeah, thanks very much indeed, Winifred. Can I just check, your birthday is the 7th of December, Winifred?
It is, yes.
Thank
Is it the
God,
same as yours?
The right one. That's okay. Thank you, Winifred. Yeah, okay. So, welcome to sunny Skipton, in the beautiful district of Craven, the western frontier of North Yorkshire. Because we actually meet Lancashire, not that a lot of the Yorkshire people will accept that, of course. It is God's own country, without a shadow of doubt, and I'm really proud of what we've achieved as a district. But there's a huge but. I'll come on to that in a minute. Just like Pat, we adopted the climate emergency fairly early on. We weren't one of the first. We were certainly behind Pat in Newcastle. And we've actually presented our first review of the policy as well, just to see where we're up to, and that was in September this year. And in truth, we've made some really good progress in addressing our own emissions. And I say our own emissions because that's actually quite important. So, what have we done? Yeah, we started replacing electric vehicles. Got to say, we cover nearly 460 square miles. We have some of the longest cul-de-sacs in the country. We call them valleys, but they are cul-de-sacs, which are refuse vehicles, and others have to go up. So we can't. The technology is just not there to assist us to put electric vehicles all the way through. We've put in electric vehicle charging points. We've upgraded the canal path remarkably so people can cycle, they can walk. We've planted, in excess of 9,000 trees in that short time. Actually working with the Environment Agency, looking at the river air to prevent flooding. There'll be about 1 million planted over the next 10 years, which is brilliant, although really doesn't tackle a lot of the issues. And we've received planning permission to put in new affordable housing development, which includes solar panels, which includes EV chargers in all of the properties, which is brilliant. We're also in the final stage, again working with partners for an ERDF, so European Regional Development Fund, to install renewable energy generation and energy efficiency measures in all our main buildings. Now, I'm delighted as well, we're working with Yorkshire Housing on that, on a couple of the estates, and it really will make a difference to those homes, to our energy use. I think one of our biggest successes is actually working with our communities, and there are a couple of those communities who want to turn their areas carbon neutral. And again, that's working with Leeds University, providing that specialist resource to them to enable that to happen. Then there's the books. By the way, I really enjoyed Sarah's presentation. I thought it was really good because it brought a lot of things home to me. So what's our biggest carbon producer? It's residential properties, without shadow of doubt, then transport. We're just not even touching the outer layer of the skin in terms of tackling that. So I'll put it like this. We may achieve our own targets internally by 2030, but actually that'll be about 1.5% of what needs to be achieved in this district. That is a real issue. Our housing stock, if you look at it, what's the incentive for the private landlords to actually put in insulation in their properties? I wish somebody could tell me that, because I'm not sure I understand that. If I was a private landlord living many miles away, why should I go through the hassle? Might help the tenant, certainly doesn't help the landlord. I think we've forgotten about nudge principles, by the way. I think the government have forgotten about the whole principle of nudge principles, which could be used in this to promote. We talked about awareness. Nudge would be a fantastic use here, which could really stimulate some activity. So that other 98.5% transport, we can, little influence, could I put it, on transport. Housing stock, we've got classic housing stock. So we've got 2/3 of our patch in the Yorkshire Dales National Park. Somebody asked the question about external cladding. You can forget that in the Yorkshire Dales National Park and the conservation areas in Craven. They wouldn't have external cladding. And if you internally clad some of these properties, the rooms will be too small to live in. So there needs to be a technological advance and an application there, as well as the standard traditional, if you like, insulation programs. I'd actually be very critical about the insulation programs. Not only are they time limited, as you say, must be spent by March this year, but actually, have you ever tried going online to actually process one of these? You know, I just think they defeat their own objective in many respects. And as I say, that artificial timeline, I think is I hope that is the first of many measures, because that's what we need. But we need to simplify these systems. You go online and look at how many different grant systems there are out there. I think the consumer will find it very confusing and will turn off very quickly. We do need to simplify both the forms and the access to. One portal, I think, will be actually a really good way of doing it. I'd also like more power with our communities. I just feel that they're often done to and not part of. It's often a white-hole decision on transport, or indeed many of the other factors. And I think we're really missing out there. We've got some communities who are really driving, and we're helping them to drive that carbon neutrality. Actually, that should be an example that's used far wider and far more specifically and captured by Whitehall. I think we've learned through COVID, actually centralisation doesn't work. And I'll say exactly the same in order to try and tackle our carbon neutrality. I won't say any more. Happy birthday for December the 7th, Winifred, and I will leave you to it.
And do we share a birthday, Paul?
Not quite. I'm a Capricornian in January.
Okay. Okay. Tracy, I don't know whether you wanted to speak. We do have questions. I don't know whether you were intending to speak now. Tracy Harrison?
Hi, Winifred.
Hi.
Hi. Yeah, I hadn't particularly...
okay, that's fine, because we've got plenty...
I will though just say, I mean, it sort of, I think all of I thought the presentation was excellent, and I think that the panelists' contributions have been really, really interesting. And it just feels to me like there is a huge opportunity here. We know that government are looking for ideas and proposals that will support levelling up and economic recovery. And I think that we've got an opportunity with the new political geography of the North and the changes there. We know that Red Wall Tories are going to be looking for things that they can point at when we approach the next election. And you know, I totally agree with everything that's been said about we need to make the case for that sustained commitment, political commitment, and sustained investment in this over a 10-year period. But I think that we also need to paint a very clear picture of what we could actually get on and deliver by the time of the next election, so that we can really engage them in that. And then the other thing that's really stood out for me in the discussion, and I think the point's been very clearly made about the people element of this, that need to build consumer awareness and understanding of the technologies, that need for co-creation. I think that we need a campaign to build interest in the career opportunities around this. We need young people to feel excited and optimistic about a potential career in green energy. And I think it would be wonderful if the North could lead the way on all of this and be that centre of excellence for low carbon housing that people have talked about. So I hadn't planned to speak, but there you go.
Thanks, Tracy. It has a history, obviously, doesn't it, this story about making homes carbon efficient, and it has a history in the industry, in the sector, of false starts and so on. So I know from my own experience it's a big job to do. Let's go to the questions. If you've asked a question and I name you, will you say who you are, and then we'll come to you and you can pose that question yourself. So we're going to go first to Ian Thompson, who I think has a question for Sarah. And you may have to unmute your mic.
Sorry,
There you go.
Can you hear me now? Hi,
Okay.
Sarah. Hi. I know you touched on the issue of the supply and skills and training for heat pumps. I just wonder where you see external wall insulation training fitting in with that agenda as well. Certainly at Magenta Living, our approach is going to be fabric first, and particularly around the external wall insulation. And we see that as a real growth area and potentially a jobs and skills area, particularly in the northwest region. I wonder where you see that fitting into that wider issue.
Yeah, well, thanks, Ian. And I think you're absolutely right. A fabric-first approach is going to work best, not only in terms of heat pumps, but in terms of thermal efficiency. And I think that fits really well with what we're saying as well, because we're basically saying that the programme for low-carbon housing needs to look at three things: the heat pumps, the insulation and retrofit that you're talking about, and also the provision of heat networks where it's appropriate. So I think it's absolutely part of that wider package. And I know from the discussions that we've had that measures to improve thermal efficiency through insulation are actually one of the most cost-effective ways of making progress on this fairly quickly. So I would absolutely support that.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm muted. Sorry about that. That's the your Zoom nightmare comes true. So Martin Broadbent is next. He's from Connect Housing, and he has another question for Sarah, I think it is.
Hi, Sarah. Yeah, it's probably more of a comment really, and that's that the West Yorkshire Combined Authority last month published a report called Scaling Up Better Homes Yorkshire, basically setting out a fairly detailed roadmap towards zero carbon across all housing tenures by 2038, which is the timescale for zero carbon that West Yorkshire's adopted. It strikes me that there are a huge number of parallels with the work that you've talked about this morning, and I think it would be really useful to cross-reference between yourselves and West Yorkshire Combined Authority to see how the ambitions could be aligned.
Thanks, Martin. I think that's really useful. I think we have spoken to colleagues in West Yorkshire, but I will double check that and make sure that we're cross-referencing. But thanks for the heads up.
The next question is from Paul Fidderman from Carbon Homes, and again, it's a question for Sarah. Paul.
Thanks, Winifred. Firstly, can I say I thought the report was great and the presentation of it, and it's a really welcome contribution to the debate right now, particularly the focus around the skills issues coming out of this. You'll have to forgive me though, I am an accountant and my mind always runs to the money on these things. So I was doing a bit of work on the back of my metaphorical fag packet, which if our experience as an organisation is typical of the whole of the affordable housing sector, I reckon we need to be spending somewhere around 25 billion a year for the next 30 years for each and every one of those years. Have you done anything to kind of estimate the scale of the challenge? Because I know it's not just about the affordable housing sector. The Northern Consortium did some work a couple of years ago about non-decent homes in the private sector as well. So there are obviously lots of homeowners who are out there who will struggle to generate investment to improve the thermal performance of their homes. So have you done any of that? Who should pay for this would be a broader question for the panel. And how would we do that in a way which didn't ultimately pass on the costs of that to users and exacerbate the fuel poverty issues that exist along large sections of our communities?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. It's a great question. We've in the report, and I didn't talk about it in detail today because we're still finalising the figures. We have got a detailed breakdown of the number of jobs that we think could be created and the potential GVA uplift from that. And we've also looked at potential costs of this over a 10-year period. I mean, essentially, part of it is making the case to government to say, look, this is our commitment to this agenda. This is what we're trying to do to help you fulfil your commitment to net zero. Will you put the investment, will you match our investment, if you like, over the next 10 years to actually realise the opportunity? And I guess that's the central ask that this programme puts forward. But as part of that, what we're also doing is making the point that this isn't just about a cost, this is an investment in recovery. So the chance to anticipate some of the costs of longer term unemployment that we've seen previously, and the scarring impacts that come along with that, and all of the knock-on costs that has for the public purse. We're arguing this is a chance to try and anticipate some of that and to get in early to support people at this time. The other argument we're making in the report is that if we do enough to build the demand at scale, that in itself will help to crowd in private sector investment as the market starts to warm up and we start to de-risk it, which is something that we're very used to in many parts of the North in trying to overcome market failure. And in doing so, we would anticipate that the costs would also start to come down if we can build enough confidence into the sector and enough long-term confidence, if you like, so that firms can start to plan and recruit and all the rest of it. And that actually, hopefully, will help to bring down costs over time. And I guess it comes back to what Sandy said in his discussion. It's about that northern pound and arguing that if we can get this investment in to support this programme, then that actually will generate more GVA in the longer run, and actually more money in people's pockets that will stay in the north and stay in those communities that the government are so keen to level up as part of their kind of wider and ongoing strategy. Does that help, Paul?
Absolutely, great, thank you. Yeah.
Right.
Did any of the other panelists want to come in on that, or should we press on with another question?
Winifred, just to say that I think there's a good example there as well. I mean, the FIT payments, the feed-in tariff payments, when they started, they were actually quite high, stimulated the market, the actual cost of production came down, and now, they don't exist. You don't get it because the price is down. But it does need that initial market stimulus. I fully agree with Sarah. Thought she gave a great summary. Just thought I'd throw that in as an example.
There's a question here that's come for Patrick on the panel, anonymously. It says, given the prevalence of fuel poverty, how do we make low carbon energy options affordable for low income families? Patrick, I don't know if you thought about that.
I suppose two aspects to that. Within the social housing environment, clearly we're trying to do that by combining a number of things together, as has already been talked about. So the retrofitting, the shift to heat pumps, but combining that with renewable power on each side as well, so that those things combined make the efficient running of the house possible and affordable for tenants. Outside of the social housing sector, I think it's kind of much more difficult, because I think there's a kind of a gap there that's required or that's occurred, whereby it is very difficult for certainly low income families to think about how they're going to engage with these new technologies. I think from my point of view, that, and some of this is happening already, is there are some private investment companies, and indeed some of the larger energy companies are looking to invest into properties, and there are different methods of how that's paid for over time. So it doesn't need a large lump of capital upfront, which allows them to effectively pay as you go to get access to low carbon technology. But I think there's still a kind of deficit there which needs to be filled from somewhere. And it isn't clear at this point how that's going to work, because you will get this, I think, widening gap between either those who have the money, those who live in social housing, and those who perhaps in the private rented sector who get left behind. And that remains, I think, an open question.
A similar anonymous question again for the whole panel, but on a similar theme. We need to remember these are people's homes. Tenants aren't always motivated by climate change. What do the panel think the best ways of talking about this? Is it about selling net zero? Is it about lower fuel bills or warmer homes? I don't know what you think. I don't know who'd like to answer that.
Yeah, I'm happy to, Winifred. So what we've seen from our pilots is that the running cost reduction is phenomenal, particularly where we've retrofitted. So it can be about £100 a year for everything. So we think it's very much around having a warmer home, having a safer home. And, you know, a lot of our tenants, you know, one of the biggest issues we have is when we go to do the gas servicing is that they don't have their central heating on for large parts of the year. And we had a program around that. So I think for us, and we've already done some work with our customers, it's about warmth, it's about security, and the benefits are huge. So I think that's an angle that very much that we've been using and discussing with our customers.
Thank you. I know Pat Ritchie wanted to come in there as well. Pat.
The only thing I would agree with what Ian said about, you know, making the kind of efficiency economic case and people seeing reduction in their fuel bills and kind of a much more usable system. I suppose the other thing, you know, we've done quite a lot of sort of pilot and stuff with our housing stock through Your Homes Newcastle, and you know, we've done things like we've got something called a Q-bot, which does underfloor insulation, and it does it in a very kind of non-disruptive way, because it kind of goes under the floorboards. I don't know the technicalities of it, but it insulates your floor with very little kind of disturbance. Things like linking housing blocks up to district heating networks. Again, you know, there's things you can do which aren't as quite as disruptive that sort of make the case. And I think there's something about kind of building awareness of that linked to the case that Ian was talking about, and just thinking about how you kind of get more of a awareness, behaviour change nudge. I think with what Paul talked about, that just starts to get people to think differently. And you know, if you think about post-COVID, you know, we are all going to live differently, and there's something about how that kind of this all fits with that. And somebody said, I think at the beginning, your home is probably, it might have been you, Sarah, I think, you know, home's probably much more important now because of the way we're living differently, and cities will look different, how you travel around will look different. So there's something about people's kind of perceptions changing over time. You know, if you look at Newcastle, we will at some point in the next, probably later in the next year, be looking at things like charging people to drive into the city centre if you've got vehicles over a certain age. We'll be looking at much more investment in walking and cycling and public transport. And to me, it's part of that kind of broader sort of easy ways in which you can kind of change your life. Some of it doesn't have to be too hard, but it can make a difference. And so I think this is a kind of behavioural hearts and minds type campaign that we need to think about.
On that hearts and minds, Dave Proctor has a question for the panel. Can we go to Dave?
Yeah, should be able to hear me now, I think.
Lovely, yeah, okay, I can hear you.
Hello, Dave Proctor, Chair of Together Housing Group, who's sold off our energy division, I think, to somebody in Glasgow, I think, Winifred.
You know, I never make a mistake when I think, might this be right, might it be wrong? I always make a mistake when I think I'm absolutely right.
Not too good. Yeah, quick comment. I think been a really good session, some really good presentations. Thanks to everybody. I think we need to do a bit of joining up. We've got huge investment programs on health and safety coming down, well, here now, real today, which is not separate from all of this. We've got modern methods of construction stuff and all the technological things that's happening, not in a box, needs to be joined up. Huge requirements for social investment, again, needs to be joined up with all of this. So that's my comment, really, and we need to get that joining up. My question, if you like, is around how we get some momentum and head of steam to this nationally, which of course will be led from the north. But how do we do that? I think back, I'm old enough to think, to the Clean Air Act, 1956, and that was a huge impact nationally. People walked around in this miasma of fog and were dying all over the place of bronchitis. And then 10 years later, we had this brave new world of everything was sunny. And it absolutely made a world of difference. And people believed in it and signed up to it. How do we get that kind of commitment nationally? How do we get that leadership nationally and led from the north? How do we get all the joining up done? How do we get the consumer awareness that we need? So come on, we've got a row of leaders here. Tell us how we're going to do it.
Who would like to start?
I'm happy to start. I agree with David. I think that the opportunity is there. I think it's about taking the option now to influence government. This has to be led by nationally, but by the north, by saying in the north, when we go to the comprehensive spending review next year, this is what we can deliver in terms of a northern solution to climate change and zero carbon. This is the offer we can make, and this is how we're going to deliver it. I think the Northern Housing Consortium have been involved with this. I think Homes for the North, which is another part, are involved with this. I think the social housing sector, because of their ability to deliver, is probably prime face to do this. I think when we do it, what will happen is it will drag the private sector with us because they'll see the opportunity. And I'm afraid the answer to the private sector in terms of private rent is probably twofold. One, I think the Affordable Housing Commission recommended a fund to actually buy some of these properties back to allow us to control them. I think that's part of the solution. The other is it will have to be mandated. To be able to rent a property, we'll have to set a minimum energy target and then fund the improvements. That's the only way the private sector will actually respond, having come from the private sector. I know it's how it thinks. So I think there has to be an economic incentive for them to do it. But I think what you see is also a change in their funding institutes. We had a credit rating session yesterday morning, and it was very clear that the funders want to understand our approach to this. They see it as a primary threat to how they fund. So I think you can see the economic model changing. So I think my answer to Dave is I can see in 10 years' time this actually being solved, but it needs momentum. We need to push.
Is that Sarah? Would you like to come in? And then Pat.
Yeah, just two very quick points on David's question. First of all, I think we're in a situation where we've got a government with a lot of new seats in the north of England. We've got a northern research group which are crying out for, which are basically making the ask of government to commit to the levelling up agenda. Here we've got a project which, you know, as we've all said, we're all committed to and we all want to make happen. It helps to address many of the issues that they're facing in their own communities. It helps to provide a plan for recovery out of COVID. So that's, I think, a real opportunity to get this on the agenda. And then the second part, I think, is about the wider participation and getting the electorate, if you like, on board with this and making this a priority for everyone. And I think we do that through much more concerted efforts to get people to participate in the debate, like we've been doing in Tees Valley. So getting people in Tees Valley talking about climate change and involving them in the conversation and trying to co-create solutions with them. And I think very much along the lines that Pat was talking about as well. And I think not being afraid to have those conversations and trusting that you know, once that people have got the information in front of them, they would come to a similar conclusion. So I think
sorry,
which I would argue.
Sorry,
I would just add a little bit to what Sarah said, in that I think this is about aligning the politics as much as possible. I think the Red Wall MPs are important, but I also think if you look at the work that the Convention for the North did on its submission to the Comprehensive Spending Review, the core cities also said much the same around the importance of investment in this agenda. And it seems to me you need to get as many different lobbying groups actually making the case for the same thing and with the same messages, and get the mayors aligned to it, the city leaders, and the kind of, you know, I suppose a cross-political buy into this from the north. And I really do think there is the potential to do that over the next 6 months. And I think at that level, you make the case. Delivery, it seems to me, needs to be coordinated at the combined authority level, and then investment at that more local level. And you know, this will happen at different layers within the different structures that we all operate within. But the key is to really get the politics aligned and get the CBI, the chamber, and a whole load of the business organisations arguing for the same thing. And I do think there is potential to use things like the convention, to use things like, you know, the networks that we all have to really make that case, but to do it in a way that frames it as investment for Treasury with a return. You know, whatever we do, we need to frame it in the kind of CSR type, you know, social and economic value that you get out of this pitch towards Treasury. And there's scope to do that, I think.
Pat, thank you. And Patrick Berry wanted to come in. Patrick.
I just wanted to reflect really on the example that Dave Proctor said, which was the Clean Air Act, which was different because we didn't have a choice about that. Everyone was mandated to do the requirements of the Act, whereas now we're effectively engaged on a volunteer basis, volunteering into making the changes that are there. And I suppose it's to what extent, or what's missing perhaps from the equation, is the impact of regulation, which is coming in for new housing, but looking back at most of our housing, which is already here, our existing stock, how do we drive regulation to actually make people have to do this? It might be over a long period of time, but without that, we are reliant on this opt-in process, which is always really going to be very difficult to achieve. Obviously, backing that up, you need financial incentives to help people do that and the support that's required to drive it. But at the moment, that's a kind of a missing element of the whole equation, where people like us are happy to go forward and try and achieve that with our own stock because it's the right thing to do. But there are vast numbers of privately owned properties and private rented properties where that simply isn't the case at this moment in time.
We've got about 6 minutes left, and there's a good anonymous question which I'll perhaps just put to you. It says, given some of the stock in the region is so far behind, what is the panel's view on retrofit versus full regeneration, you know, knock it all down and build again? Your thoughts. Who should I start with? Who would like to start on that? Do you want to show your hand? Ian Wardle?
Yeah, and that's a really live discussion for us at the minute, in that we've just got, as I mentioned before, we've just got a report back from Savills, which has analysed the cost to decarbonise our 34,000 homes. And what we think that will do, it will force some discussions around net present value over 30, 40 years and whether it's economical to invest. Having said that, from the pilots, what it's shown is that the costs are coming down, and there's already duplicate costs. So our investment program is 1.4 billion over 30 years. There's already duplicate costs in there that we can take out. So I don't think it'll be as bad as first assumed. I think some properties that you wouldn't think would be economic actually will become viable. And the technologies for blanketing and homes are moving very, very quickly. They're not as cumbersome as they were before. Pat touched on it. There's quite a lot of new methodologies out there. So I don't think it will be bad, but I also think it will be a good opportunity because it will force some important discussions again about the right housing offer in some economies, and it's still not aligned rightly to the types of skills that are being created in that aspirational offer. And there's still some legacies from housing market renewal that haven't been finished off. So I think that would be a useful time. But I think it needs to be a very positive thing about vision around place and aligning communities and local leaders around what they need for that local economy rather than taking things out and disinvesting.
Did anyone else want to come in there on the demolition versus retrofit? Sarah. Oh, and then Paul. Sarah, did you want to come in?
Just very briefly, that issue came up in the conversations that we had, particularly in areas which have high concentrations of very much older housing stock. And I guess that was why people were emphasising the importance of a neighbourhood approach, that you can't implement a sort of a low carbon decarbonisation of housing programme without reference to the kind of the wider neighbourhood challenges that an area might face.
And Paul Shevlin?
Yeah, and really it is about the communities. Don't forget, if we go for wholesale clearance, which we've done in the past, but you are destroying communities. And I know some of the streets in the sky around Manchester in particular, where you destroyed Ancoats and those various areas, maybe they needed the slum clearance, but actually what was the replacement? Physical determinism, which really didn't work. So I really do think we need to do that with extreme caution. I do agree with Ian that the prices, the cost will come down, but don't forget the cost to the communities and what we try to develop as individuals as well, as leaders, if you like, within those communities.
Paul, thank you, and thanks to all our panellists. I'm going to draw this session to an end, and thanks obviously to Sarah Longlands for that presentation that started it all off, and to delegates for their contributions. Now, the Housing Minister, Christopher Pincher, he couldn't be with us live today because obviously a few things going on at Westminster, but he has recorded a video with his thoughts on how housing can help create a stronger North. I have to warn you that when the video came, it only came last minute this morning. The sound quality is poor, and we've boosted it absolutely as much as we can. So bear with us if you would. Here he is, Christopher Pincher, MP, Minister of State for Housing.
A real pleasure to join you, albeit remotely, at the Northern Housing Summit today. I want to congratulate you on the work that you have been doing and that you are going to do through this COVID-19 crisis. I know that our country, particularly the North, have been really touched by the emergency. Liverpool, Greater Manchester, across Yorkshire, the North East. Things have been really tough and challenging. And so I want, first of all, to thank you for everything that you have done to build homes and to repair them and keep your clients safe and your team safe during this very difficult time for you and your families. But I also want to say that in this particular new phase of the emergency, where because infection rates are still spreading, we've had to introduce a tier 4 restriction across the whole of England until the 2nd of December. During this time, we want the housing sector and the work the housing associations do to continue. That's why I've been really clear that we want people to continue building homes, buying homes and repairing homes, so that the housing sector and the right of people to move and enjoy their properties can continue. But looking beyond the COVID emergency, there's a real job of work to do. And the North is going to be integral to our economic and social recovery. There's a lot for you to focus on. We've got our Affordable Homes programme, the biggest injection of cash, something like £12.2 billion in the package since 2006 to build more affordable homes in our country. Something like 180,000 homes will be built due to AHP over the next 5 years, and about half of those will be for affordable or social rent. And the role that housing associations play in the development of those homes is crucial to the programme's success. We've also got the Brownfield Regeneration Fund, £400 million of funding to regenerate brownfield land, and a chunk of that money has gone to Liverpool, to Greater Manchester, to West Yorkshire, and also to Teesside. Beyond that, we've got the Getting Building Fund, £900 million of cash for shovel-ready projects, and something like £327 million has been earmarked for shovel-ready infrastructure projects in the north. And then, of course, there are our planning reforms, because we believe that the planning system is too slow, it's too opaque, and not enough local people get involved. We want a much more strategic planning system, one which is much more open and accessible for people to get involved in, one which is much more transparent and much more quick. And that's why our planning for the future consultation, which has just ended, has had a huge number of responses to ensure that we can get those planning reforms right. So whether it be the Affordable Homes Programme, whether it be infrastructure and brownfield regeneration, whether it be in our planning reforms, the work that you do is crucial to getting out of this emergency, to the north powering ahead and powering out of COVID. So thank you very much for all that you are doing, all that you will do, and I wish you the very best of luck with your summit today.
Again, so sorry, I was muted again. Can you hear me now?
We can.
You can, good. Sorry about that. I was also trying to read your emails and comments and everything all at the same time. That was the Housing Minister. And before we leave him, I think we are just going to take a couple of comments on what he has said, beginning with Nigel. Nigel, would you? Sorry, am I misunderstanding my messages?
No, we're going to unmute Nigel Wilson so he can come in.
Okay, lovely, thank you. And then after that, Paul.
Okay, I'm unmuted, I understand. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right, sorry.
Cool. Thanks. Nigel Wilson from Gen 2 and also Chair of Homes for the North. And thanks for a really interesting morning so far and well sharing the circumstances. I think just to respond to the Housing Minister, it's great that he is being so clear in terms of his message to the housing sector in terms of carry on doing what we're doing. And I think that's so important. But also, I think what's important is that he and his colleagues take the opportunity to ensure that they deliver on the level and up agenda across the north. I think we're all clear that whether it's the planning reforms, whether it's the distribution of affordable housing provision and the rest of it, that the north gets its fair share. And the 80-20 rule needs to be addressed. The appraisals that are going through the Green Book from by Treasury in terms of future investment plans, absolutely critical, as is the need to address the green agenda has been discussed this morning. So I think the opportunity is there for the Housing Minister and for the Secretary of State to demonstrate their commitment to the North and the support for our work by ensuring we get a fair distribution of those funds right across the North. Thank you.
Thanks, that was Nigel Wilson. And we're going now to Paul.
Thank you, Winifred. And I absolutely endorse Nigel's comments there. I think it's great to see a housing minister talking so effusively about the work of the affordable housing sector and also talking about the importance of our sector in the recovery. I think that's very welcome, and it very much echoes some of the commentary that particularly the Northern Housing Consortium, but others as well, have been making about the central role that housing can play in the recovery. He's right, isn't he, that there's an awful lot to do. There's a lot of change coming down the track, many things to absorb, and the affordable housing programme will go part of the way to meeting some of that. And as Nigel says, there is a lot of work to do to make sure that there is a fair and equitable allocation of the available resource to ensure that key projects in the north do get the funding they need to go ahead and with pace, so that we can play that role in the recovery.
Paul Fidderman, thank you so much for that. That brings us to the end of this morning's session. Thank you everyone who took part. We've got some great guests and great speakers for you this afternoon, including those two regional mayors.